Welcome everyone to the episode of Kaboom Talks. And it's like an absolute pleasure for me to have Vidika Yadav with us. Vidika has been a colleague, a friend, a shoulder, and and many more things because we've known each other for a very very long time now. And I'm an absolute fan of what she's done over the last 10 years, especially, and what she's been able to create and really sort of reach this very, very important and very, very difficult population to reach, and anyone who works in this space would know how difficult it is to work on SRH and really sort of create a digital sort of presence in tier B and tier C cities of India, especially. So I'm going to do a very quick introduction of what all Vidika has done, and then I'm going to let her talk about herself. Vidika is an anti-slavery activist. She's a sexual rights activist, and she's a gender rights activist, and a social entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience. She has recently stopped working on the very lovely Red Love Matters and joined Design Thorn Works, which is another fantastic organization where she, as the managing director, is going to work towards empowering 1 billion children around the world to become change makers for a better world. And this is like very, very exciting because now she's going to be using design more than anything else. Um, Ritika is here today because she co-founded Love Matters India, which is the first ever website in India to give complete, honest, and unbiased information on sexual and reproductive health and rights. She's also the co-founder of Teen Book, India's first comprehensive life skills resource hub for adolescents, teenagers, parents, and educators. She also serves as the chair of the Global Advisory Board on Sexual Health and Well-being, and she was also featured in the lovely award-winning documentary Female Pleasure. So welcome, Vidika. And what I would want to start with is really sort of, let the audiences hear about the fantastic journey that you've had because, what you created at Love Matters didn't happen overnight. And even before Love Matters, you've done some fantastic work. You've been with some great organizations, doing some heartbreaking stuff over there. So, I mean, there's always like the culmination of all those things that you learn that comes and you create something fantastic. And I thought that's what Love Matters was in your life, right? So tell us a little bit about that journey that you took.
Hi, Nirmala. I mean, first and foremost, it's so lovely to actually have this conversation with you. I mean, I think we really haven't had this conversation, even though we know each other, and we have collaborated. But it seems like it's been a journey of sorts, and also seems like the right time to have this conversation. So I'm so glad that we are having this conversation, and thank you for having me on Kaboom Talks. Um, well, journey. I mean, to be very honest, only if I could, sort of tell you that I had a career plan, which led me to where I am. Uh, but that's not true. And thankfully, my parents always trusted me with the choices I made, which they could never understand. And I only realized, now how cool they were. Um, I think I've essentially always been a risk taker, and I think I was never attracted to a planned path or a planned career. For me, it was when the first time I came across, knowing and learning about the crime of human trafficking is really when I decided that this is something that I want to work on, and so it was very it was something that I was exposed to and something that really did impact me, and that's when I decided, this is something where I would want to invest my time and probably learn. I wasn't really thinking about a career, but you know how it is, you start and you don't even realize that you make a career out of it. So I specialized on the crime of human trafficking and modern day slavery. I started my career with working on rescue and rehabilitation and repatriation, working cross borders in high risk areas, and then training police and prosecutors, writing manuals, working on standard operating procedures, and doing that not just in India but in other parts of the world. That those were initial years of learning, and I think I'm so fortunate to have worked with activists and advocates and people on ground that really made me the professional that I am today. And I think I carry all that learning with me everywhere I go, in any position, in any organization that I work with. And then actually, very few people know that you and me have collaborated on a very exciting project, which was for MTV Exit Traffic, and I think that really shook the television space, and got awards in in a category which really, where this show was an underdog. And I think I remember how hard you worked on that project. It was such a fantastic experience to collaborate on that project with you. And yes, I mean, the journey took me to many places and worked with many organizations: UN Office on Drugs and Crime, Free the Slaves, BBC Media Action, many independent projects, around the world. And then I decided to take a step back, which is when I became a mom, and thinking about what is this next project that I want to work on, that I want to take on. And Michelle Ernsting, who you know well and who is now a dear friend and colleague, I think she entered my life, and she had this big idea of what SRHR for young people could look like in a new world, which is being taken over rather quickly by new media spaces. And that idea really blew my mind, to be very honest. It was, I think, what I was attracted to again was something that uh, that did not exist, but that had huge potential because it was new learning. No one really knew. Everybody thought working with young people on SRHR was a challenge, even for organizations who had been in that space, but digital was unheard of. And looking at new media spaces was actually not even thought of. And it was a challenge to really work with young people, even to understand what they were looking for. How do we make them feel included? What are their challenges? So really, I mean, it was a playground of sorts, and I think that's really something that attracted me to working on a project where we could really work from scratch and really see what was the potential of this idea. And in India, where Love Matters India took off in 2011, we first started with research.
Before you start talking about Love Matters, I have a tougher question for you. Because once we start Love Matters, there's no going back into this, no going outside it. So I'm going to ask you a tougher question before you start off on that,
Yeah.
which is also a very contentious question in the entire development space, which is, what is really normative change? Is it important? And is normative change possible using the new media, the digital media?
I mean, I think first and foremost, as probably all of us understand, norms, which are usually the unwritten, sort of rules that guide our social interactions in the society, the expectations that we have, gender norms, just a collective behavior or even individual behavior is shaped by the norms that are prevalent in any community, in any society. So when we're talking about normative change, it's really about shift in those social norms, values, beliefs within a community, within a society. And it's also about challenging, sort of those existing unwritten rules, attitudes, and behaviors. And the reason, it is important to be able to do that is because it's about progress, it's about progressive change, it's about promoting new, inclusive, and equitable norms. And which is why normative change is so important. And it is so important to be able to promote, positive social outcomes with, while you're doing what you're doing in terms of addressing harmful social norms. um, the question that you asked, is it important? Well, if you look at issues around gender inequality, discrimination, violence, social injustices, we all know that norms in our society, have in a big way pushed, pushed people in situations where they do not have equal rights, where they are treated unequally, where they do not have a voice, where how they behave, how they're supposed to behave, is sort of is a result of what is sort of an acceptable norm in a society. And for us to look at what needs to change, it is extremely important that we focus on those norms, we understand those norms, we understand the history behind those norms, we also understand and work with the community to, sort of um, really unpack those norms, but also make people feel, what they believe in as reality. Is it a reality, is it a fact, or is it a value? And I think that is really important in the perspective of why normative change is important. So yes, I mean, that's the work that essentially we do at Love Matters when working on sexual reproductive health and rights, the unwritten, often unwritten norms in the society that define what young people should have access to, what women should have access to, how they should behave, should they be having sex before marriage, who should be having sex before marriage or after marriage, or contraception or abortion. All of those things are, sort of circled around the norms in the society, in the community, and which is why it shapes individual and collective behaviors in a certain way. And it is so important to be able to kind of let the norms guide your work, because for you to take people on an unlearning journey, you have to do that while understanding what are the prevailing norms, which they hold so close to their hearts.
And you said something very important, which was like collective behaviors, and there is individual behaviors, but then those individual behaviors are often shaped by the socialization that we go through, and that socialization includes family, peers, society, community, the larger governance, everything. And when we if we really want to see change, then we have to be working at all those levels. And obviously, just going to a girl and talking to her and empowering her alone isn't going to bring that change. And I guess that's exactly what you have been doing. But yeah, just to kind of define why normative change is so important, I'd say it's also it's very close to my heart too, and it's kind of something that we feel that very strongly about. And so let's now start talking about back in 2011 when you started working on Love Matters. Like, how did the journey begin? Where did Love Matters come from? It's such a lovely name, where did all of it come from?
Well, I think I did talk a little bit about where we started, but to be very honest, I mean, I think looking back where Love Matter started, it was also looking at, that how throughout history, activists, advocacy groups, grassroots organizations, all the people working in the, what typically was called the family planning space and not sexual reproductive health and rights space back then, they all played a very very important role in pushing pushing the conversations around sexual and reproductive health and rights. And they were doing it in different ways, but there was a lot of work, that was being done by organizations and activists. And this also included raising awareness on comprehensive sexuality education, fighting any discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, challenging harmful cultural practices, talking about norms, addressing norms, and of course, they were doing it in different ways, in different forums, and where things were, sort of where they were rooted, and where Love Matter started was to really look at what the history was, and in India, what were the struggles and the challenges that organizations, activists were also facing when working on, when working with young people and addressing their sexual and reproductive health and rights. And frankly, I remember the year we started, and one of our first partners actually was Tarshi, and I think we owe so much to that organization in terms of giving us a very very solid understanding of the landscape. So we did extensive research in terms of really understanding what the organizations were doing, but also what were the challenges, what were the gaps, how were they really engaging with young people, was there a strategy in place, and what were the pathways that they were taking to really even work with young people. And a lot of those insights really, sort of formed the basis of Love Matters, in terms of why Love Matters and why it needed to be a digital platform, because we also did a research with young people in India, asking them, what did they think about information? Did they need this information on love, sex, and relationships? How they were articulating their needs around love, sex, and relationships, because they were not calling it sex education. They were not calling it, looking at it from the perspective of HIV and AIDS, which was really the most prevalent way of looking at young people and their sexual and reproductive health. It was always a disease prevention approach. It was never from the perspective of other aspirations that young people had. Everybody was aspiring to have great sex. That was one of the biggest insights that we had from the research. Everybody wanted to have great sex, including young women. So it was not just about young men, it was also about young women. They had questions around around their bodies and intimacy, and and there were a lot of gaps because absolutely no one spoke about consent. So it those insights really formed the foundation of the work that went behind designing Love Matters India. And of course, the fact that while we were also looking at, how online spaces were slowly taking over, it was, I think, a lot of these social media platforms were still at a very nascent stage, especially when looking at using social media for social impact projects. But we really wanted to see how they're looking at internet platforms and mobile platforms. And the insight that we also received from young people was that I need to be able to access information uh, through my laptop or my mobile phones. Mobile phones was not, sort of on our list, and we were like, people really want to access information in a way which is very private. I think something that did come across was the fact that there's a lot of judgment around sex and anything related to sex. They had questions, but they felt that they're probably the only ones struggling with that issue. Is it going to be okay to ask that question? Where can they go for their responses and get responses and answers? Where can they feel safe? So what we realized was that Love Matters could be that space, which is a safe space for young people. And how we call Love Matters as a space where you get information on love, sex, and relationships and everything in between, was really about talking to young people in a language and tone and style that connected with them. We wanted to answer their questions in a way which, articulate them in a way, the way they wanted to speak to us about it. It had to be friendly, it had to be open, and honest and non-judgmental. And that is the space that Love Matters became. It was, it was a right from the beginning, we designed it as a website that could be easily accessible on any kind of low-end mobile phones. We were very clear about the audience that we wanted to target. And I think with the given resources and the research that we did, we wanted to focus on the northern part of India. We really, looked at tier 2 and tier 3 cities and looked at Hindi as an important language. We started at a time when there was absolutely no information. And well, pleasure-based information was just non-existent. Nothing in Hindi, nothing in vernacular was available, and even when it was, whatever English resources were available, they were not contextual. It was not speaking to the Indian audience, and that is where sort of Love Matters India started. I think we invested a lot of time in the research, in really understanding the audience and understanding what will go behind our content strategy, designing the characters, designing the character of Auntie G, who became the most popular icon for to talk to young people about love, sex, and relationships. And frankly, half the world would call me Auntie G, just because Auntie G, and that meant sort of speaking to Vitika. So so yeah, that is really where Love Matters India started. It was based on hardcore research and evidence, and I think we did that right, and that is why I think we hit immediate success.
Yeah, that sounds actually very important. I remember talking to Michelle, and she was saying exactly the same thing. That that it's that insights that become like the core of everything that you're doing. And so, I mean, when you say these things, it just sounds really easy. That we spend time building characters, we spend time, deciding what we're going to write, spend time. But a curriculum and on sexual health is not like an easy thing to create. I mean, because it also has hardcore facts in it. It's not just about having a fun conversation, right? It has facts, it has biology, it has medicine, it has stuff in it which is hardcore. And also, like, when you say that we wanted to understand our audience and really talk to them in their language, be non-judgmental, again, very easy things to say. because certain things are, they're not right. Like, for instance, consent. If somebody says that, I want to have sex forcefully with my girlfriend when she doesn't want to, then you have to be able to say, dude, you can't do that. That's not allowed. And a part of judgment does come in there, but so I'm sure there is like the elements of creativity, of storytelling that goes into kind of defining all these things and building that grace, because you're not in the black and white space. You're not saying this is right and this is wrong. You're really playing in the grace, which is the toughest space to play in, because that's life, right? It's the toughest space to play in. So what were some of those devices that you used when you were creating this? Like these creative devices. And I'm also asking because, a lot of the Kaboom audience wants to know this all the time. What are those creative devices that you use when you're having these very difficult conversations? Fun, yes, but also very difficult.
Very difficult. Great question, Nirmala. I think because I think as practitioners and as I would say that not just for myself and the team that I built around Love Matters India, I think the most important thing was to unlearn. See, I come from a hardcore activist space. So there was a lot of unlearning for me to do as well. Also because, you also have to acknowledge the social and cultural environment that you grow up in. What have you been exposed to? And we all come from a place of judgment because of the social environment that you grow up in. So for it was a sort of a journey of unlearning for me as well. And I think that's the starting point. If for you, if you're not authentic, in and if you cannot address where you struggle, then it is you will not be able to bring authenticity to your work. And I think that's a practice that we followed in the team. We made sure that we made a safe space for the team to be able to say, I have been extremely judgmental about this because I did not know better. And I think that's also the perspective that we have always used for our audience. The idea is not to come from a space to tell them that, hey, you know what, you're an idiot and you should know better and consent is important and all of that. We want to say all of those things, but then the approach is really different because it's about hearing them out. It's also about acknowledging that, all right, this is your perspective and we understand, but would you like to know these things, which are important for you to know why probably this is inappropriate, why this is wrong. So the approach has always been to encourage conversations, to be able to listen to them and not to just, sort of not to preach and not to just tell them that we know better and which is why you need to behave in a certain way. It's a very tough space. But that's the only way you can encourage conversations, because you do not see any which way success for us meant work, being able to work with people who are not converted. We were not speaking to the audience who already speaks your language, right? For us, we were connecting with people in tier 2, tier 3 cities every single day, answering questions that make you very upset and very angry. But at the same time, that was the starting point to have conversations. And people were angry, people were reacting, but that was success for us because for so long, a lot of these topics, people have, either have had not sharing opinions or they have suffered in shame and stigma. But the moment they were reacting, it also meant that it was challenging patriarchy, it was challenging norms in the society, which made them upset. And that was a positive sign because we wanted the digital space and these digital spaces to be seen as public spaces where we could encourage these conversations, where we could also teach people that you have to learn how to behave on these public platforms. What are the how we were moderating the conversations. So that really was the starting point. And when we're looking at sort of a curriculum on sexual health and rights, it also meant they're not calling it sexual health and rights. They have their issues, they have their problems, and their problems are, I have been giving my girlfriend a pill every day so that she doesn't get pregnant, but I don't want to use a condom because it's not. Or you have been talking to the audience and telling them that abortion is, their right. What are you promoting? This is not. This is not okay, and this is India. So all sorts of things. And what you're promoting, you're promoting same-sex relationships. What kind of information is this? This should be banned. People started reacting, and those reactions were also a sign of success for us because they were coming to the platform, they were reading, and they were reacting. And over the few years, what we saw was that the community started engaging in a discussion. They were also moderating the discussions, and we started seeing women open up and talk about their why they felt that they had a right to abortion and in what circumstances. So it was really fascinating to see that journey. And I think every time somebody got upset and came up with a point, it was an opportunity for us. It was that opportunity that we didn't want to lose. We had to have that conversation with them. We had to listen to them. We had to be patient, and then also give them the information that they needed, and to keep sort of pushing that information, to keep having those conversations. And I think that's really the strategy we've had. And of course, the strategy that we use, the formats that we used, to be able to create a character, who seemed powerful, who seemed authoritative, who seemed fun, witty, and saying what needed to be said, to a male who wouldn't listen to a woman otherwise, right? And who are you? So I think a lot of those elements really worked in terms of promoting conversations, especially with young men who find it very exciting that an older woman, sort of knows more, and it has been sexually active. So I think all of those insights also went in designing the characters that we worked with, and how people were consuming, sort of information, how we could drive conversations. And that's what we have called, sort of the curriculum, because it's not like you said, it's obviously there are educational goals with curriculums, but in the digital space and the digital world, which was a huge opportunity, it was not just about discussing anatomy and sort of STIs, and HIV, which are all extremely important, but it was also about talking about real issues in relationships, talking about consent, which was not being articulated as consent, which was acknowledging that a lot of young men are actually confused about it. It's not like they don't understand it. They don't understand it because they really genuinely have questions. They don't get it because nobody's talked about it. Nobody's taught them. Popular culture, Bollywood films, everything around them is not really giving them the information, in terms of how what a consensual relationship looks like. So
Yeah.
you also have to come from a place of empathy and understanding, and I think that's where storytelling also becomes important, because storytelling has to have authenticity, has to be able to build empathy, has to be relatable, and we have, I mean, I think something that we really focused on was stories of hope, and positive narratives and positive stories, which I personally am a big fan of, because I think that really works, in terms of really speaking to an audience and making it aspirational to have good and healthy relationships.
Yeah, once again, when you say these things, it just sounds like, yeah, of course, this is how you should do it. But well, she's just stating the obvious. But I know for a fact as a practitioner that these things are very easy to say, but often there aren't positive stories out there. You have to really, really dig to find the positiveness there,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about tough things like consent, because no one's wrong. Like you said, young men are confused. They're not wrong. They're not bad. They just don't know. And
Yeah.
and not knowing is nobody's fault. They just don't
Yes.
have role models. They haven't seen anyone have those conversations around them. They never had teachers. They never had friends who actually spoke in positive manners about relationships and women around them. So I mean, yeah. So tell me, like in all of this, I'm sure there were many, many moments, and everybody keeps saying what were the highs, but I really want to know what was the lowest point. Like what was the point where you said, I can't do this?
uh Actually, there have been so many challenges, frankly. I mean, I think just trying to prove to the world that pleasure is important. We have to address those uh, questions and those topics which nobody wants to talk, because pleasure is not taken seriously, period. And it's often about male pleasure. Just doing this work in the non-profit space, of course, that um, there is already, sort of, there was a struggle to really make people understand that this is serious work, this is important work, this is not frivolous. And I think that really was, sort of a challenge. But I wouldn't say that was the lowest point. I think the lowest point, um, yeah, I mean, I think it's really challenging, when I think when we're talking about, you're very frustrated because you have these conversations happening, and you have this, and of course, the way we are having those conversations, what really happens after that? Do they come back? Do we know what happened? So some of those moments are very jittery, I think, because of some of the situations that people have shared with us, and their personal lives and their stories. I think, there are moments where you say, 10 years, 11 years of work, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. people are still, sort of asking the same questions. And what has changed? Of course, we're talking about millions of people. We're talking about the huge reach and new people joining in, and so it's. I think it's just really frustrating because I think day in and day out, you're working so hard, and of course, challenging and changing social norms, and it's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight, but you have your frustrating moments because you're like, you've been putting in all this work and all these years, and what really has changed? And a lot has changed, but
Yes.
you still go through those moments saying that, why are people still, sort of behaving this way? And so I think those, I wouldn't say that, I think it was more from the perspective of how you feel at work on certain days, right? Because these are hard questions and these are difficult questions. And to be very honest, people share with us really intimate stories, including pictures, including things which is very, very hard.
Mm.
So I think those are some of the moments. I can also say some of the lowest moments have been, when you have to try and prove it time and again, even after so many years of work, that this work needs to be funded,
Right.
frankly, because that's really been the biggest frustration. I mean, everybody sees Love Matters as the example in the world, when you're talking about digital spaces and sexual and reproductive health and rights and scaled up. Actually, there's no other program in the world that has scaled up the way Love Matters has scaled up. And can you imagine the program still struggling with funding? So that's like really frustrating because it's like you have to prove time and again that this work is important, and you have the audience, you have the impact, you have everything in place to show. But I think that will, sort of, which is more from perspective of the donor community and the political will driving some of those things. I think that's frustrating.
And that brings me to actually one of the most important questions and one of the most difficult questions to answer for anyone who works on normative change, which is, how does one measure or evaluate a digital program like Love Matters? Like, how does it happen?
For us, it was even more difficult because for us, what we were trying to prove was that why pleasure-based approach works. And that was a new strategy, that was an approach in a world where one, SRHR was new because it was coming, always being looked at it from the perspective of family planning, and young people are not having sex to plan families, right? To even understand that what are the aspirations of young people, where are they coming from. I think that bit, but also to really understand why pleasure-based approach really works. So for us to be able to generate evidence on that, that also feeds back into our work, was very important. And what we have done is to have independent evaluations. So there's IDS, Institute of Development Studies in UK, that did a research study, across all of Love Matters, sort of platforms around the world to really look at. So we did, sort of articles and content on the website that was written from the perspective of pleasure, and then there was, informational content, and then we looked at how the audience was sort of reacting to those content pages, and why that approach worked really well. So for us, it was also about making sure that there is evidence to support and back pleasure based work, as well as, sort of, it was not just about the numbers and reach and likes. The community grew huge in no time, and it remains the only and the biggest platform in vernacular in Hindi, for the Hindi speaking audience. And we get around 100 questions a day, that are answered, and across the platform. So these are really personal, intimate questions. People trust Love Matters as a safe space. People also want Love Matters to be the, to probably be the doctors and tell them everything and give them all the medicines. And that's a real challenge because we are not we are not medical professionals, but we connect with service providers, but the trust is so much that they want everything from Love Matters. So that's been an interesting space also for us, but also, a struggle, so to say. So for us, how we are looking at conversations and conversations over years. So for example, how the conversations on the issue of abortion have actually changed year after year, because that's an important campaign for us every single year. We have done virtual reality film on safe and legal abortion. We have done that on intimate partner violence, when everything you would type on IPV, this was in 2015, I remember. It was, it was all about polio vaccination. Something around intimate partner violence was just a concept which was not really understood or talked about. And you would know, young people in relationships where they're probably, it's not just physical violence, it's verbal abuse, it's financial abuse, a lot of those things. And they felt like, who can they speak to? Can they speak to their peers about it? Can they speak to their family members about it? And and the and the reality was, they felt they could speak to no one, and they really struggled. So for us to also design campaigns which was not about telling them if you are in an abusive relationship or not, but really making them think, just kind of doing a virtual reality piece where we gave them a character, Anuja, while they wore their, sort of headsets, and just letting them live a few situations in Anuja's life to really decide for themselves what is the status of their relationship. And that was so powerful, because actually with that campaign we got about, yeah, we got about 50 or 60 stories every single day from people about their own personal, their own relationships, and articulating their own relationships from the perspective that I never realized that this was happening to me. So it's sort of interesting, because we have used strategies where we would let people speak to us and bring their stories, which is, I think, huge impact, because we want to hear from them. These are their lived experiences. We've also had spaces where I mean, usually you would do your surveys and other things, but I think we have done a combination of things. And it's really heartening when, when young people get in touch and they say that, thank you that Love Matters is there. Otherwise, I would have felt very lonely. So, a lot of these proof points in different spaces that we have had. And also because we are huge online, but we also have a huge offline presence where we used our digital tools and take them to the community in interesting ways. So it's a strategy in a hybrid model that has worked really well for us, and we have been able to engage with the community in a way that we get feedback from them. We they have been a part of the content creation exercises that we have had, and those, those stories that tell you that yes, you're bringing about change, and we getting that from people, in small and big ways. When a girl in the community goes and she fights with her parents, and she says that I want to study more, and I want to do something more, and I do not want to get married at this point of time, and I read about this story on Love Matters, or I saw this video of Ranjana Kumari, and I want to be like her. So I think all of those stories are stories of impact. And I also want to add, this is not what a lot of donors might call impact, because they would watch.
Exactly. That's what I was going to ask you. I agree this is impact, but I'm not a donor.
Yeah. Um, but I mean, I think the interesting thing is that, see, Love Matters is also, we never had a predecessor, right? So it was the first program. There was no donor ever who had funded anything in the digital space, and which was pleasure based. So it was so controversial. So I think what we have done is we have also taken donors on a learning journey with us. And some of the first donors, if you see in the SRHR space, who funded this work, they funded Love Matters first, and we were able to convince them to do pilot projects, and then, sort of take the journey forward, and how then one donor was able to influence the other donor. It's still a very, very small space. You wouldn't see, I mean, pleasure, I think pleasure is embraced so much more. We know that now. You have these young influencers and activists as well, with their pages. But I still feel, when it comes to vernacular, when it comes to speaking to that audience, it's still a unique space to work in, and there's so much work that needs to be done. And I mean, I think we've also been very clear about how what we look at as impact, because frankly, I mean, it's not like the donors know better. you know so we've always been on a journey with it. We have tried to do everything from a space that we have had these independent evaluations. FHI 360 did an evaluation of all our platforms independently, and termed it as one of the most powerful tools for young people, on issues. So it's also about, well, you can't have a, you can't really just look at those numbers, and it's not a typical way. And actually, I don't have a perfect answer for your question in terms of what impact, because I have articulated impact the way we look at impact, and that's how we share impact. Now it depends on the donors, and brave donors, and I think we're so lucky to have some of those brave donors, and really thank you to them for believing in us and for changing the way things sort of work in the donor space as well. But I think it's forever learning. I mean, I think we're always looking at better ways of sort of showcasing impact.
Yeah, I mean, I must say that you have had some very sort of different and authentic donors in that sense, who kind of supported, kind of believed in the real stories as impact, and yeah, which is why this could happen. So now, from all of this, one of the things that comes is like we've discussed consent a lot, and we know that consent is kind of the cornerstone of most conversation that happens on sexual and reproductive rights, right? Um, by from that perspective, and you were a digital platform, and things have changed over the years. I also remember, in between, yeah, I completely forgot. I remember in between you were, and there was this point where you were completely frustrated with all the social media platforms because they just kept taking off all your content all the time. Right? Yeah, we can laugh at it now, but I remember how frustrated you were at that point of time. You're like, every day they just take off my content, man. So, and how you guys had this big fight in one of those meets. I remember, with one of the social media giants about why they need to be able to, why the algorithm needs to be able to differentiate between sex and sex. So, yeah, I mean, through all of that, but now, like digital's become a monster. It's near becoming a monster, right? And what goes like really closely hand in hand with sexual and reproductive rights is also the rights around privacy and our digital rights, which many of us, even us, are kind of completely in a again a gray area about. Right? We don't know where all our information is stored. We have no idea who all has our data. It's all out there for everyone, and especially India, which is a country which is not really crazy about privacy. Like we know of countries which are really really crazy about their privacy, and they would never give out their data. But we're not like that, and a lot of us in India are completely uninformed about it. Right?
Yeah.
We like you said, people share very intimate stories. Right? Love Matters, of course, was very different. But how did Love Matters address this entire question around digital health privacy and rights?
Again, really important question, Nirmala. I think we were just, I think, also very lucky as a global program uh, to actually have a service in the Netherlands, right? So we have always been GDPR compliant. Um, and so for us, understanding privacy and digital rights and how to ensure that for our audience has been very very important. And like you said, of course, it's very difficult in India, and everyone is always looking at workarounds, right? So for us, I think that was a little bit sorted right from the beginning because we were always GDPR compliant. We always made sure right from day one, and we were also informing our audience about it time and again because we get so many questions every single day. The people are leaving their names and their contact numbers, sort of everything. So, but for us, it is very, very, we do not store any personal data and information. We've always been very clear about it. And that is something that even our donors have to be comfortable with. Because we would always put our audience first. So we would have the data around the questions and comments, but we would always remove before publishing all kinds of personal information, and we do not store it anywhere. And we are very, very clear about it. Along with that, I think a huge part of our work has also focused on training young people on privacy and digital rights. And it is just something that, like you mentioned, no one really think. I mean, look at us. How many times do we read I accept? And then go on a platform. So being really, sort of aware of the fact that you have certain rights, you also need to understand how your information is going to be used by a certain platform is very important. We were also doing that because we have had a huge community on social media platforms, right? Facebook, Instagram. And these are not communities, which we own.
Yeah.
So that is where a lot of this information sort of is put out. And
Yes.
for us, it's a struggle because we cannot control it. We can only inform our audience. So it's been a struggle of sorts, but we have also been in this space where we have, I mean, of course, you mentioned the frustration we've had with the media platforms, social media platforms, and banning our content. We have been fighting the good fight. We have been very vocal about it. And this was last year, along with Center for Intimacy Justice based out of US. We have been working on research studies, and we sort of put out a petition and one of the big social media giants has actually agreed to a change in algorithm to promote good quality SRHR content for young people. Now, what that means and how they'll do it, I think is a challenge.
Yeah, but
Uh, we have,
it's a win. I mean, it's still. I think it's still a big win. The second step is the next fight, but I guess to be able to do that, yeah, because like when you say that we are GDPR compliant, of course, I mean, there's no doubt that Love Matters is going to misuse the data. But when we're on social media, we've no idea who has that data, right? And we've no idea where, and we know that that data is being used. It's not like it's
yeah,
not a secret anymore. We know that data is
yes,
being used and
yes,
misused. So it's kind of, it just also becomes very difficult to have these conversations in public spaces. But if you don't go into the public space, then once again you're just talking within yourself inside the closed room, which doesn't help again. So it's a
absolutely.
very difficult sort of yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question. But this is where I have one question, which is like, I always feel that even for me or for young people who are starting to use digital health platforms, for instance, with COVID, like all the platforms that cropped up, and even Arogya Setu for that matter, and COVID, where all of us exist, whether we want it or not, we're all there, right? So now, as all of us, as citizens, as young people, what is that one question that we should be asking before sharing our digital health platforms? Whether it is that, whether it is this, whether it's the wearables, wherever. What is that one question that we should be asking?
I think this is a question, I would also answer from the perspective of what we feel at Love Matters is really important and what we have been training young people on, but also from the perspective that I, as an informed digital citizen should know, and that's a learning that I've had. I think one important question that we all need to be able to ask confidently and get answers on is, how will the data, my personal data, be collected, be used, and protected? It is everyone's right when you're on a platform, one, to be able to please read and understand whatever they say in their policy, and you will never be able to understand everything, and frankly a lot of these platforms are operating out of a different country. So we know that we are not in a powerful position, right? In terms of, not everybody has a legal person or a sort of a legal team helping you and supporting you, but just the fact that to understand how will my personal information, my anything regarding me, how will it be collected, how will it be used, how will it be protected? I think this needs to be a part of our curriculums, school curriculums. I think this is so important, because I also feel that the way these platforms will be defined in future will be how people create pressure on which platforms would we want to use, right? Because I think right now it's more about the platform is thrown at you and then you're using it. But this needs to change. I think we need to be a much more informed audience, and we need to be able to understand our rights, ask the right questions, and then sort of say that, well, unless and until I have a platform that can assure me of these things, I don't think I will be comfortable using that platform. I mean, I know I'm really idealistic, but I think at some point this relationship needs to change. I think the consumers need to be able to define and decide how platforms will work. The example that I use, forcing, like getting a big giant to rethink their moderation policies around such an important issue, it's very important. They have to acknowledge it, they have to be accountable for it, and people have to own that fight. And I think it's something that needs to really start at a foundational level. I think the fact that we're all digital citizens now, it's such an integral part of our lives. This is something that has to be a part of our curriculums. Every curriculum in school is only talking about digital safety, and most part they're not looking at it from the perspective of being and feeling powerful as a digital citizen, and saying that what are the kind of questions that I can ask, right? Why is it always about, oh, I need to be safe, I should not share this, I should not share that? I mean, you should also be able to say that, well, I need to be able to
Something, that's not going to happen, that cannot happen, and therefore you need to create sort of terms and conditions that I can understand as a young person, as a normal person in the world. I should be able to understand what's written there, and not the legal jargon that nobody can understand outside the legal world, man. Nobody can understand what is written there outside that world.
absolutely.
Yeah, there are all these jokes, right, about how a lawyer would write a song and then you can't really understand what song that is. It's literally that. So yeah, I think it's an absolutely fair ask, and I think it's time that all of us kind of start demanding that from not just the giants, but also everyone who's busy taking away our data and collecting information, which is like everyone from the pharmacy next to you to,
Yeah, you just cannot control anything anymore. It feels like but I also, I mean, I also have this hope with the next generation, because I feel if they are going to be informed of this, if it forms a part of their thinking and their curriculums, they're the future creators, right? They might come up with smarter platforms. We've also kind of started to think that these are the platforms and there's nothing beyond this. I mean, I have a lot of hope with the next generation. So maybe it's going to change the way people think and how they design, because I think from the design perspective, these platforms are faulty.
Yeah.
So if they cannot be changed, then probably we need something disruptive in the space.
Yeah, I mean, if you cannot change them, then you replace them, right? I mean, and we know of young people who are working on platforms that are going to be safer spaces to be in. There are people working on it at smaller levels right now, but I think the future probably is that, because yeah, like you said, younger people do understand what data privacy means and how important it is. Considering now we know that it is the new oil, and it's and we can see what has been happening, right? And
Yeah,
we can see the perils of it now. So I
yeah,
think yeah, that should be the future, and hopeful, of course. Yeah, absolutely hopeful of what would come out of it. Yeah. Which brings me to the last question that we have, Vidika, which is something that we ask everyone who comes on Kaboom Talks, and we kind of ask the question with a twist based on who they are and where they come from. So what we want to know from you is, what are the three key good ingredients or three ingredients for a good story when you're talking about sexual and reproductive health and rights?
um, I would say one, context. I think it's really important that you understand the context of your audience, and so the three ingredients must, if you're speaking to an audience, you have to have relatable content that will come from a good understanding of the context. So it has to be contextual. I think it's super important, which makes it relatable. Also about, I think, the characters. I always, sort of be. I mean, I think that's a given. What makes for an engaging story. I think characters are really important, but those characters have to be authentic. Now, what also happens is, with SRHR, there's a lot of mirch masala and sort of all of that. That is not. I think authenticity is extremely important, along with making sure it's contextual, it is relatable. And I would say, I mean, this is my personal take. I think it's about hope. It's about stories that that are relatable, where you can empathize, where you can empathize with the characters, but there's also hope, and that hope goes a long way in making people feel good. So for me, I think it's just I think that makes for effective and engaging conversation. Don't make it preachy. It has to be fun. It has to be relatable. It has to be contextual, and all of those things can be, can bring in humor, can still be politically, sort of correct and everything. But authenticity is really important. Relatability, contextualizing it for relatability, and hope. I think I would say that as the three main ingredients in my perspective.
Context, character, and hope. That's fantastic, and I think that would be like, it would be fun to write a story with a great context and a great character, which is hopeful and aspirational, and a happy story eventually. Yeah. This was fantastic, Ritika. This is lovely, lovely talking to you. We've kind of finished exactly on time. There's anything that we didn't touch upon, and if you still want to talk about, and the audiences haven't been asking questions, even though I think we've posted us telling them that they can ask questions. But if anybody has questions, please do just type it on the chat. We can't see it, but we do have Payal sitting with us, who is helping us with this entire Kaboom talk, and she'll be able to give us the question. But apart from that, if there's anything that we didn't cover or I didn't ask you that you want to share about Love Matters, please go ahead.
Ah, probably that love matters is not just in India, but it also has a China chapter. It is in Latin America, it is in Egypt, and it is in Africa. So Love Matters is a global program reaching millions of young people and having millions of conversations actually every single day on love, sex, and relationships. So if you have friends who need information, who need support, and if you want to connect people with information, you can trust Love Matters because love matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Love matters. And that's, I think, a great, great note to end anything on, that love matters. And please go ahead and live your life with a lot of love and just make sure that, there is consent. That's about it. And be
Yes.
safe. And yeah, with lots and lots of love to everyone who joined, and love to you, Vidika. On that note, thank you so much, and we'll see you in another Kaboom Talks in 2 weeks from now. And we'll be bringing you more workshops very soon. So keep looking at our LinkedIn page, and you'll get the updates there. Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Nirmala. It was a pleasure. Pleasure is
Absolutely.
the word. It's Friday. Have a pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye bye.